Observability Guru. Today we have Nuwan, uh, who is the co-founder of TestChimp and also ex-Google, which we would really like to hear more about what his experience there. I think probably there's a lot of things he would have learned from Google, which has brought into his new company. So Nuwan, thank you so much taking the invite and spending this time today.
Thanks. Thank you, Indigo, for inviting me on this show. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, we are very excited to hear about you, hear about your experience, and especially hear about that company you form as well. To make a start, I think interestingly, probably around 4 months back, you resigned from Google, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And how is the journey from there to now?
Yeah, so so I've been working in the industry for like I think 14 years now, and last 8 of those in Google. And interestingly, so I worked in 3 companies. One where Virtusa, which is a $1 billion company, and then I
Yeah.
worked in a smaller company, let's say $1 million
Mm.
company, and then Google, which is a $1 trillion company. So it's sort of like I had the opportunity to be in like all scales of companies, which I think was a pretty unique opportunity. And now I'm doing the startup, which is like starting from ground, which is like $0 company. So I
Yeah.
think that gives you a good perspective of the entire tech industry, I guess.
That's great. Yeah. And how long have you been thinking about this new initiative, like your new company? Is it like after you moved out from Google, or is it something has been there in your mind and you always want to get it out?
Yeah, so this idea came about while I was working in Google. So a little bit of my background over there was to give a quick overview. Um,
Absolutely.
so I was working in Google Pay most of my time at Google, and I was working in a bunch of teams, and the last one was in server infrastructure team, and so
Okay.
it was the infrastructure building blocks for the server infrastructure of Google Pay. And one pain point we observed was that we had a lot of hardship in figuring out when things break, why things are breaking, like why they were not captured before it went to production. And
Okay.
so this is where the idea sort of sparked, I would say, in identifying that observability data is not much used in pre-production stages. So if you talk about observability, it's mostly we talk about in production identifying issues and alerting them, and with players like Datadog and Dynatrace and so on. But there's not a lot of usage of observability before things go live in production, and there's a lot that we can do with this data. So this was sort of the philosophy behind the product idea, but then it's of course evolved over time after speaking with a bunch of external clients, and then we got to where we are right now.
Okay. That's great. Nice story. And I always dying to ask you, who came up with that name?
That was me.
All right.
The
Okay.
the idea behind the name of TestChimp relates to what we're doing as well. So I'll take a bit of a moment to explain basic ideas. The idea was that so to take a step back, what we realized working in all 3 stages of companies was that irrespective of scale, one problem that annoyed a lot of people in development was testing. So testing was one of those annoying things that people didn't really enjoy doing, and there was a lot of fragmentation in tooling, and just the processes were kind of annoying. So the idea behind testing was that can we simplify it as much as possible? And the easiest way of testing obviously is like you just manually test it. Your app, you just run through your scenario. But the downside is that with manual testing, it takes up human effort, and so every time new features come in, you have to now test the new features as well as make sure that the existing features are not breaking. So which is
Yeah.
called regression testing. So
Yeah.
as you can imagine, so the regression test file keeps on building up with time.
Mm.
So the idea is like we need to automate those regression tests so that those are run on autopilot, so that the human effort is mostly focused on like new functionalities that's been developed.
Yeah.
So the idea behind TestChimp is that can we passively observe what happens in testing environments, your manual test sessions, and gain insights from that and automatically generate those automation tests. So that's where the sort of the chimp idea came about. So we install a chimp in your testing environment that sort of
Okay.
hangs around and observes what happens in your testing environments. And then it learns from those sessions. It takes a full stack capture of those sessions and then learns from that to generate automation tests. So that's how that name came about as well.
All right. Okay. That's awesome. So, and when you say session, it's just a one execution of API, is it?
No, so a session is basically like a user journey, something you do in your app.
Okay.
So let me actually show you what a session
Absolutely.
basically looks like.
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Can present.
yep. Sharing is I'm sharing in the
I think it came up. Yeah. We are
yeah.
able to see the. Yeah.
I think it's a little too smaller though. Let me um, okay. Share. Okay. All right. This is better.
Okay. Yeah. It's great.
Right.
Yeah.
So as I explained, so what we do is that we install a chimp. There's a couple of modes. Which, one is a Chrome extension, or there's an
Mm.
SDK version as well.
Mm.
It's just a way of observing the sessions, and
Okay.
then however you observe, what it does is that the session data is sent over to TestChimp backends, and so
Mm.
when you log into your TestChimp account, you would see all of the sessions that has been recorded.
Mm.
So as a QA
Mm.
engineer or a developer who's
Mm.
tasked with writing tests, all you need to do is like run your scenario that you want to automate in your app, and it will
Okay.
be captured by testing. And so when you play this session, this is what it will look like. So you can see your UI interactions can be seen, but
Yeah.
on the right hand side, you can see the API request that is happening in correlation with the UI changes. So you can see that
Understood.
they're clicking the calculate shipping, and now you're seeing that get shipping cost endpoint
Yeah.
is triggered and so on. Now, the reason why I said like these are full stack captures is you can see, so you can go into each of those endpoints and you can see the request and the response of that API. And
Okay.
you can also see over here, there's something called the call tree. So you can not just see the API layer, but also it covers the entire stack of your microservices architecture. So your front end will be calling some backends, over here it's calling a user
Mm.
service,
Mm.
and
Mm.
so on.
Mm.
So we have backend SDKs as well, which enriches your OpenTelemetry data to include the
Okay.
response payloads at every single service as well. So you
Mm.
get the full picture. So it's the UI, the API, as well as the call trees of every single request as well. And so the idea is that now that we have captured this
Yeah.
session details in its entirety, can
Yeah.
we create a test quickly from that? So
Mm.
testing currently focuses on creating API and full stack tests. We
Mm.
will get
Mm.
into more detail about like why we are focusing on the API layer at the moment.
Yeah.
Um, So by clicking the button called create test, you can create what it does is that it copies over all of the requests from the recorded session, and then once it is loaded, it will go through the API request and response payloads that it observed and come up with suggested assertions that you can add to the test. So one common issue we have seen with like test authoring is that people will write very minimal set of assertions like the response code was okay or something like that.
Yeah.
But imagine if your API is returning lists, for instance, then if the list is empty, but the response code is successful, your test would keep on passing, but your system may be broken. So if you automatically identify assertions and add them like this, it doesn't take a lot of effort, and you get a much thorough test created automatically. And the second thing with like writing up API automation tests is that you need to chain those requests so that using variables so that they can be repeated again and again. So for instance, let's say a common scenario is that you have a login step. So the login step, if you're using OAuth, you would get a auth token, and then you need to use that auth token in the subsequent steps. So as a test author, you would need to like extract that from your JSON body and then create a variable and then use them in the subsequent steps, which of course takes a lot of time to like author it manually. So what we do here is that we observe again the request and response payloads, identify the correlated fields, and then we come up with suggestions saying these are the variables you should be defining in your test. So you can see over here, it has automatically identified that the login step is returning a token, and it should be used in these subsequent steps as the authorization header. So you can add that, and so that pretty much creates the test with no coding needed. So if you go to this step, you can see that there's a variable defined as token, and if you go to the subsequent step, you can see that it has automatically updated the authorization field to be bearer token. And then you can just save the test. You can update a lot of details. Instead of like, if you go to Postman, you'd have like edit things in like a free form, but over here you can edit all of those fields precisely with like click and point kind of UI, and then you can even get let's say your team writes your API tests in Playwright, for instance. You can get this test that was created automatically exported as a Playwright script that you can just put it into your Playwright test suite. So you can see that it authors all of the requests bodies, and then it does the variable extractions, and then changing those requests and writing all of those assertions that you have defined as well. And you can just download that.
That's awesome. So one quick question, Nuwan. So I think all this happens when you just went through a couple of the scenarios, right? In that application manually, couple of times, and it recorded it, and then tools allows you to kind of like observe the data, how the API has been used, and then pretty much allow you to do the backend automation like this.
Exactly, correct.
Okay, and how about this? So we know sometimes like testing, it's usually the happy scenario which works, but like there are a lot of corner scenarios, like there are complex situations. So how does the tool handle those areas?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. So that's another reason why we're focusing on API layer is that if you think about an API, you need to test a whole bunch of range of scenarios. Like imagine a search box. You would want to make sure you are entering very large value to see whether that works, or empty values, or weird Unicode characters and various things like that, which can take a lot of effort for a QA team. So what we do is that you can upload your OpenAPI or Swagger specs,
Okay.
or we can learn from the session recordings as well. So because we have the API payloads, and you can ask it to generate tests for you automatically. So you can give a custom prompt and
Okay.
select which test suite it should be saved in, and you can just click generate. And sorry, so you can give a custom prompt, and then you can select a test suite, and
Okay.
you can also. So this is going into a little bit more details, but when you come to like testing APIs, usually you need to run a set of pre-steps like authentication steps and stuff like that,
Mm.
so that the step can be properly executed. So you can configure those as well over here, but if for the sake of this demo, we can just skip that. And
Yeah.
so now it will generate tests behind the scenes and asynchronously. I can
Okay.
show you some of the existing tests that's been created. So if you look at this, you can see it's generating all kinds of like user IDs, null, missing user
Mm,
ID,
mm, mm,
you know,
mm.
excessive values and stuff like that. So various scenarios like that are automatically generated for you so that you can do exhaustive API testing without going into too much manual effort.
Okay, that's great. Uh, one quick question ask you. Uh, I like if you come, I know like I read like you have the LinkedIn post when you came out from Google. Something you mentioned like you learned from Google is that it's not about what your competitors are doing, but what you can bring to the table. Right. When you look at the other tools available, and if you try to compare like what the TestChimp is trying to offer, what do you think? And where you are differentiation and what is you bringing into the table?
Yeah, so I think one of the bigger pain points I've seen when it comes to like testing tools is that there's a lot of fragmentation
Mm.
out there at the moment. Um, so, um, like if you think about the current landscape, um,
Yeah.
so this is probably a good overview of
Okay.
um,
Yeah.
all of the different pieces
Mm.
that
Mm.
is out there. So
Yeah.
a typical application would have like a front end, client side, and then a whole back end. So in your back end, you have the front end API layer, which is tested with the APIs.
Mm. Mm.
And then you have load testing happening on that as well. And then you have your microservices architecture, which
Mm.
service A calls service B calls service C and so on, and then
Yeah.
queues and things like that. And to cover those, you would separately have to write integration tests
Mm.
because your API test tools does not have access to the internal details.
Mm.
Um, so if you look at Postman or REST Assured or anything like that, it's basically like you send a request, you get a response, and then you assert on the response
Mm.
body. And then you on the client side, you have like cross-process testing, front-end automation,
Mm. Mm.
manual QA also happening. So there's a lot of fragmentation that is out there at the moment, and how observability comes into play is that uh, so observability allows us to like create sense like connect all of those individual data pieces together to create one single picture. And so basically these fragmentations can be removed with that. So as I showed earlier, so our session recordings are basically full stack recordings. So
Okay.
the API layer has access to the subsequent steps details as well. So
Okay. And probably, sorry to interrupt you, and probably you can touch about, I think there are three integrations you are bringing in, right? Like the Chrome extension, the front end SDK, then front end plus back end SDK, which will give you the full stack observability, isn't it?
correct, yep.
Yeah. And so the third part is like, so is it like for the 1 and 2 is more of a SaaS product, and the third is like more of a, you can deploy it in your on-prem as well. Is that the pitch you are bringing in?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
So it's like, give me 1 second. I'm
Sure.
trying to find. All right. So how it works is we have the front-end SDK, which captures your
Yeah.
UI plus the API layer.
Yeah.
And if your service stack is OpenTelemetry compliant, so how OpenTelemetry works is that you would have a collector set up in your backend systems to which all of those service blocks would be pointing to that collector to send your OpenTelemetry trace data. And so TestChimp supports ingestion of OpenTelemetry exports. So in the exports configuration, you can just put one line saying like, export my OpenTelemetry data to TestChimp. So one of the advantages of going with OpenTelemetry is that it's a vendor agnostic way of communicating your telemetry
Absolutely.
data. So nowadays, Datadog, Dynatrace, Honeycomb, whatever observability player that you go with, they all support OpenTelemetry ingestion. And so what you can do is that you can send your telemetry data to Datadog, for instance, for your observability purposes, but in parallel, you can send them to TestChimp as well.
Okay.
And what we do is that we connect those OpenTelemetry data with the rest of the API data to create that full stack picture. So even in the SaaS version, you can just point to a public endpoint and have that full stack capability enabled.
All right.
And
Okay.
so to answer your question on like what sets us apart from pure API tests is that our API tests can be extended into like full stack tests. So this is something I think something really interesting about like bringing in observability into testing domain. So I think that's like two buckets of benefits when it comes like bringing in observability into testing. One is like you can write much richer tests. So what I mean by richer tests is that you can validate data inside your stack as well from the single test that you wrote. So let me find an example for that Pinpoint, and that calls into your user service. Now over here you can see what was the request payload that the user service got. So you could have assertions created which are like, is this the correct email address that was received from the front end? So you can say, this is your left-hand side of the expression, and this is the right-hand side of the expression, and you can create an assertion like that. So this is an assertion that asserts not just the API response, but your service internal stack data. So so the assertions can be basically anywhere in your stack, not just the API. And so imagine like if it involves like queues and databases and stuff like that. A common issue with like just testing, relying on what the API response says, is that the API response could come out as happy, like 200 response code, everything is fine. But internally things are broken, and things get written to your database, or the correct value wasn't enqueued into your queues or stuff like that. So the typical solution, the existing traditional way, is like you write an API test and then you write an integration test separately to test the internal details. And integration test writing is quite hassle because you have like bring up mocks and fake servers and stuff like that, and it's like that maintenance. But if you have access to the trace of that test request, then the idea is that you can validate things along the trace and correlate these with whatever. So that's one. So one is asserting internals, and the second is you can use this internal data in your test as variables. So the idea is that, so a common example is imagine an OTP based sign up or sign in flow. You would some backend would be sending that OTP, right? Now the traditional way of like testing from the externals is that you would have like then have a emulator or a email listen on an email inbox and then capture that and then pass that HTML and then grab that OTP,
Yeah.
which is really non-deterministic and like complicated.
Mm.
But it is some backend that is sending that OTP. So you could
Yeah.
just go into that. So in that trace, you can just go into that step and then just store it as a variable,
Okay.
and then use it in the subsequent step in your payload creation. You can just use that as a variable in the
Okay.
subsequent step. So that is the second advantage, is like you can use the full stack data to write the test. So that's on the writing test side. And then on the runtime, when you run the tests, one advantage is that you can quickly troubleshoot
Yeah.
your issues. So
I saw someplace, I think you post saying like if there's a failure within seconds, you can troubleshoot.
exactly. So
Yeah.
so let me show an example of that.
Mm.
So over here you see these recordings for that
Yeah.
particular tester. Now, as a tester, let's say you ran into some issue during the testing. Typically, what happens with like your in development teams is that the QA would then send it to the
Yeah.
front end engineer, and then
Absolutely.
the front end engineer would
Mm.
triage it and then
Mm.
send to the back end. If you have
Mm.
multiple services, this bug
Mm.
gets transferred from one
Yeah.
team to another, and
Mm.
each of them will be going through their logs independently and
Yeah.
trying to figure out what's the cause. But if you capture the entire stack in that session, then you know exactly what happened in each layer
Okay.
of the stack. So let's see what the issue, where the issue happens. So you can see when you click that, there's an error occurring. Now you can go to this API request, um, and if you take that trace of that, you can see that this step is failing and this step is failing because of this step, um, and this step is failing because of this step, and you can finally get to the root cause step that is causing the issue, and you can
Wow.
immediately
Okay.
see what is the reason it is failing, and so there's a runtime exception happened, and this is the exception that threw up. Now this is like deep in your stack. Now,
Absolutely.
so for a QA engineer, they can just simply what they can do is they can come back here and then just get a permalink for that session and then share that URL.
Wow.
And
Okay.
the developers would then get access to this entire recording where you can quickly figure out why things are breaking. So that's one advantage.
Okay.
Is like troubleshooting your test failures becomes much easier. You don't have to like jump through multiple server logs.
Mm.
The second benefit is that
And no one like sorry to interrupt you. I think this is a very powerful thing, isn't it? Like because generally what I have seen is like the QA teams they come across issues as you said, like you raise a ticket, then like it's a always pushback, like you know it's working fine, my machine or my this environment, then someone has to recreate it, then you have to drag on someone who has access to the backend logs and what has happened at runtime, and then it's almost like QA team try to prove that something is wrong and just say this is the place where it takes so much of time, right?
exactly, yeah. So when it's like the team is much larger, it becomes even
Mm.
more profound of an issue. Like um, if you have imagine like 500 QA, 500 tester developers in the team
Yeah.
spread across like 100 different services, then
Mm.
this hot potato transferring of the bug becomes like
Absolutely. Mm.
it can easily take up days until it reaches the correct
Absolutely.
person.
Mm.
So
And
connecting those.
what I'm yeah, and what I try to understand is when there's a issue happen, what you want is to make it centrally available here, right? Like people don't have to go into other systems or like understand the logs or other thing, but most of the things can be like find out from here itself, right?
Exactly. So I think that's the beauty of observability, what it brings to the table, in
Mm.
terms of like making all of those siloed information into like one trace-based, like centralized place. And this also how it helps us with like connecting UI and the trace data is that it allows us to organize these sessions into in a much um, more understandable way. So let me explain
Okay.
what it means.
Sure. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so
I couldn't stop myself because it was like so great. Like everything was there in one place. When troubleshooting, yeah, like I couldn't stop you at. Yeah. Please go on, Nuwan.
yeah, imagine this scenario where so what we saw earlier was that there was a error during like getting the shipping cost step, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Now to reason about it from the UI, like
Mm.
um, like if you just recorded the UI, so typically what
Mm.
QA engineers would do is like they would use some video recording mechanism,
Mm.
and
Mm.
that would just be video files. Now to
Mm.
analyze those video files and make sense of it and organize
Mm.
them
Mm.
becomes a quite a hassle.
Yeah.
So by the beauty of connecting the UI session with like the backend details
Mm.
is that this
Mm.
allows us to organize the sessions in a much uh, much clearer way. So you
Yeah.
can basically, because these data are connected, you can say like,
Mm.
give me sessions where this backend state failed or this
Okay.
particular
Mm.
aspect um,
Mm.
uh, didn't work as expected. So
Mm.
so what we can do over here is that, so what I'm doing now is going to that API, the get shipping
Mm.
cost, and
Mm.
um, looking at the summary of all the requests that
Mm.
happened in the staging
Mm.
environment. So
Mm.
this is, think of it as like all of the traces
Mm.
that went through that API endpoint and
Mm.
collecting
Mm.
them into a single tree.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
and then you can see, okay, some steps are failing, and then you can say, okay, for this one, this particular attribute, give me the
Mm.
sessions
Mm.
where this was the case. So now here you can see all of those sessions where that particular backend step failed,
Mm.
so that you can organize. So this is like all of the sessions that was recorded is
Mm.
organized
Mm.
by the
Mm.
backend
Mm.
behaviors that was observed.
Mm. Mm.
So the nice thing is that it's a data centric approach versus
Mm.
going with the UI. Like
Mm.
instead
Mm.
of like figuring out where the, like if you just had the UI video recordings,
Mm.
it would be much harder
Mm.
to answer the question. Give me the
Mm.
sessions where this get shipping cost step failed,
Mm.
right? So instead, by connecting those data, we are able to organize those sessions in a much
Mm.
nicer way. And so
Mm.
this allows the QA as well as the developers to like collaborate
Mm.
around those sessions in a much easier way. And so that's the
Excellent.
second benefit of
Yeah.
bringing observability into
Mm.
testing.
Mm. Mm. Mm.
Um, and
And Nuwan, let me ask you that unpopular question, right? Like probably maybe when you're in front of like a lot of customers, they might ask you, so what? How much team size I can reduce, right? Like if I'm a very API heavy system, like I have a like X amount of QA teams, like who's doing testing. I have some automation testing as well, but I go through the typical life cycle like issues and fix it and going through. So if we onboard you, right, like test him, so what is the ROI? Like, can I get a good like when it comes to my commercials?
yeah, so if you think about so how we tell our clients is that we're not trying to replace QA engineers,
Mm.
because I think what QA engineers bring in is the human intuition, which is
Mm.
very valuable. And where we see value add is that right now these QA engineers are wasting their human time doing mundane tasks of like automating those
mm,
test journeys,
mm,
and finding out why things are breaking by going through all of
mm,
those
mm,
manual steps that I was
mm,
talking about.
mm, mm,
And there's like friction points around like communicating with developers and so on.
mm, mm,
So what we bring in is that we take out all of that, all of those friction points, is essentially allowing your QA engineers to 10x their efficiency by taking out the mundane work that they're doing, so that they can focus on bringing in that human intuition and doing this exploratory testing,
Okay.
and quickly get them create the automation tests.
All right. Okay. That's nice. And one like now I think we are in the back end of our discussion, so it's very awesome, right? Like I'm really super excited for the what you have done. So one challenge, right? So when we even sometimes me, right? When I look at new tools, something in the market is okay. Whether it's really challenging to onboard, what should I go through? And so when I'm browsing, trying to understand more of your tool, one number it hit me is this 70%. I think somewhere like probably I think you mentioned that at the moment more than two-thirds of your customers have a very seamless onboarding, right? Like it's most like inbound leads, seamless onboarding. So what do you think, right? Like I feel like without even asking, you are addressing this onboarding integration challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. When we started, we were assuming it will be like more outbound sales that we will be doing.
Okay.
But what turned out to be the case is that there were like 70%, as you mentioned, was the inbound onboarding that happened. So these people finding out about us from like LinkedIn and places like that, and search engine and onboarding. I think we didn't really have a good experience around inbound onboarding, because we were expecting like us to go in person and do that. So
Okay.
some of the things we were working on in the last few weeks was like making that experience much simpler, as you mentioned, like to make that experience more seamless, so that people who don't know me would like be able to sign up and then just use it and get value out of that.
Absolutely. But I think what I'm trying to say is like it's already there, right? Like I think it's already people are seamless using, so kind of like maybe you have designed the perfect solution, isn't it?
Well, I think it's a little bit too early to say anything
Okay.
like that, but our clients are most certainly
I
finding
think
it very easy.
optimistically cautious, probably. But
Yeah.
I,
Having said that, I think so. We asked a few of our clients like what the ROI they are seeing at the moment, and
Mm, mm,
basically our question was like, if you were to write the same test using Postman or
mm,
manually write it in Cypress or something
mm,
like
mm,
that.
mm,
So what we got was like a test that would take 10 minutes to create would be like 2 minutes
mm, mm,
using
mm,
our platform, because you just
mm.
run the scenario and then you
5x faster. Yeah.
and then you export it in Cypress
Mm,
or Playwright or whatever
mm,
language.
mm, mm.
Um, yeah, so in that way, I think we're seeing some good ROI for our clients. But I think the like rooting ourselves on observability space allows us to grow into other areas where we can bring a lot of value. Like for instance, one of the things is that we, as I mentioned earlier, like we haven't really touched upon like UI testing at the moment,
Mm,
but
mm, mm, mm,
full stack capture also captures the UI elements as
mm,
well.
mm,
So at
mm,
some point
mm.
we would plan to get into that as well.
Okay.
And another
Uh,
thing, I think one thing I wanted to touch upon was that around governance.
okay.
So basically another advantage of wait, this isn't sharing. It's not sharing. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I need to do it from here, I think. So the one of the other advantages of bringing in observability into testing is that you can then do cross-environment correlations to
Mm,
identify insights around like test coverage. So imagine, so you now have your production observability data. If you could
mm,
overlay your observability data of testing, so
mm,
if let's say a certain execution path is not executed in testing, but it happens in production, then you'll be able to identify, okay, this path is not tested by us. And this is very different from like code coverage, because this is like across your microservice architecture. So a quick example is like, let's say you are a payment app and you have like a Visa integrator and a MasterCard integrator endpoint. Now, if your testing isn't covering, say, MasterCard integration, then if you overlay those two things, you would see that that path is not appearing in testing, but it is appearing in production. That gives you very clear visibility into what user behavior is not being tested. So this allows like larger teams to use observability data across environments to govern your testing efforts as well. But this is this is not something we are focusing on at the moment. It's more appealing, I would say, to much larger teams, like 500 engineers and so on. So at this stage, we are focusing mostly on SMB market. So over there, where we are seeing a lot of ROIs is in improving the API authoring capabilities. But what I wanted to highlight was that in the spirit of like talking about our observability and what it brings into testing, I think one of the key things that it can bring is these cross environment insights, which could be quite helpful.
Okay, that's great. And Nuwan, I always want to ask you, like, I mean, when I'm talking to someone from Google or ex-Google, I'm always fascinated because site reliability engineering or the reliability concepts all came from Google, right? So what are the things, like, your past experience, you bring into this new development?
Yeah, so an interesting thing about OpenTelemetry is that OpenTelemetry is built by Google, and this is basically what we were using internally, which I didn't know at that time. So, so internally we had two slightly related products, which combined together we open sourced that. It's called Open Sensors and Open Tracing. And so then these two things got combined as OpenTelemetry. And before OpenTelemetry, the issue in the observability space was that every vendor had their own language of speaking about telemetry data. So Datadog would have their own protocols, and Dynatrace would have their own SDKs and so on. And what it meant was like, if you're in one vendor, you can't move to another. So what OpenTelemetry brought in was that now everybody speaks in the same language, and so you can move around vendors quite easily. And I think that sort of thinking was there in like Google way before as well. As I mentioned, like this OpenTelemetry thing was built by Google for Google first, and then externalized. And specifically for like SRE, the Google scale obviously creates a lot of pain. I'm trying to figure out which numbers to tell without like, I don't know, without getting into too much trouble. Edit this part out. So to take GPay as an example, for instance, we had thousands of services in our stack, and our team was in the scale of thousands of engineers as well. So this again goes back to what I was talking about, like with the larger teams where you have like individual services being worked on by different teams, and at runtime those are orchestrated together to serve a particular user journey. So finding out the responsible team for a bug or an issue itself was quite a onerous task. Like so basically what observability brings into the table is that connects all of those services into a holistic picture. Like imagine if you were to like have all of those 1,000 different service logs separately, then you would be able to find for a given request that the request would touch all of those different services, right? So where the issue happened would be a nightmare to find out if there was no observability.
Absolutely.
So that's where tracing came quite handy, and I think we were still facing a few challenges around how we. So when it comes to observability, one is having observability. The second piece is like how you use the observability. This is
Absolutely.
around like how well you instrument your system, for instance. So even if you have observability, if you're not instrumenting it properly, then you still run into issues. So one move, one sort of project that happened in Google, and it is now externally available as well, is something called critical use interaction monitoring. So the idea is that if you have APIs, these APIs, if they serve multiple different user journeys, even if one user journey is completely broken, it will not be visible if you just monitor the API's error rate. So let's say you have 5 different user journeys coming into this API request, right?
Yeah.
And one user journey is not that common compared to the other ones. So let's say that user journey is completely broken. So let's say it's responsible for say 2% of your traffic. Then if you're watching the APIs and error rates, it will be 2%, right? So you would assume that it's not a big issue because it's just 2% error rate. But what you're monitoring is not aligned with what the users are experiencing. So this is what we call like there's like a disconnect between what we monitor versus what the user cares about. So the user does not care about is your user service endpoint error rate 2%. What we care about is my bill payments going through, right? So if that user, so we want to basically align monitoring with what the user experiences. So what the critical use interaction monitoring does is that it sort of added that instrumentation to say for each request what is this user journey. So in that way, you can now slice your monitoring by the user journey and not by the API directly. So those kind of instrumentation help us to like narrow down and identify issues much earlier. So now that 2% thing becomes 100% error rate because when you're not observing the API but you're observing the user journey. So that was something that was which I found quite interesting. Which we implemented in Payment Org as well. And now I think Google Cloud has made it available as well, if I'm not mistaken, where you can now set up user journey monitoring as well.
Okay, that's great. So Nuwan, I know like you are a very busy person, like probably you want to go and do other stuff as well. So before you go, the final question for you. So what's next, right? Like you seen last 3 months, 4 months, there's a lot of things have happened, and probably last 3-4 months, there's a lot of things happen in the industry as well, right? Like people are now very onboarded with LLMs, Gen S here to stay. So what is the future? Like, so what are your big visions like for TestChimp?
Yeah, I think LLMs bring interesting opportunities to specifically for dev tools, and you see companies working on code and like companies like Codium or Cursor and so on, Copilot that takes in code and produces code. That's one area. So and I think there's a lot of opportunity with using LLMs and bringing value to every domain, but specifically for dev tools as well. And where I see testing having a sort of an advantage is that when you think about LLMs, so it's about what your input to the LLM is, right? So in the case of Codium or Copilot, your input is here's my code, now do something amazing with this code data, and it'll like produce unit tests or something like that, or refactoring that code. Now, how it relates to testing is that imagine if you could show and tell an LLM what your system is supposed to do, right? Or like this is how my system is expected to behave. It's basically show and tell, right? And then if the LLM can understand that show and tell and come up with tests for your system, that will be quite a nice thing to have. So it's basically our session recordings are exactly that. So our session recordings are a show and tell of your system, and so our UI recordings are also not videos. So these are not video files, although you see it as a video. It's basically DOM mutations that we are recording. So so our full stack recording is basically just data. It's just a text file at the end of the day. So which are very LLM friendly. So this allows us to like create a mechanism where the development teams can show and tell to the LLM how your system is expected to behave, or like these are the user journeys, and then LLMs can operate on those data and produce various outputs. Right now, we are using that to produce API testing. Next up, we can extend the same LLM intelligence into like full stack tests as well, and then go into UI tests. It's kind of like having a AI buddy on your team that observes your sessions and then understands and then makes sense of that. And because our approach is like SDK driven, so like enabling recording in testing versus enabling recording in production is just a configuration update. You can just say now run it in production as well. So what that means is that you can observe the real user sessions as well. Of course, we have like figured out how we do PII data filtering and stuff like that. But what it means as an opportunity is that you can now learn from the real user behaviors and identify the user journeys that users are taking, and then write tests automatically, so that you no longer just limit your learnings from the testing environment, but also from production as well.
Okay, that's awesome. Like, so thanks so much, Nuwan. So it was wonderful talking to you for almost 1 hour. So thanks everyone like turning in today. So we have Nuwan Samarasekera, who is the founder of the TestChimp. So if I summarize TestChimp, I think it's if you really wants to make sure your API testing is autopilot, probably that's the go-to tool. And not only it's integrated with observability, so that like your test cases and the scopes and the strategy is good. But I mean, we all know like if you test something, there's always a chance to fail hit a failure. And once that failure happen, probably it's a one-stop place to go and figure it out with all the observable data, why it has failed, without putting less trouble on your developers and others, and probably tell them that this is the reason and they can fix it. So it might like really accelerate your not only QA but your entire SDLC as well.
Yeah.
So thank you again. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for the great summary, Indira.
Yes, thank you. So nice meeting you, Nuwan. So I hope like probably in couple of months time, once the tool is evolved, maybe we can have a quick catch up again and see how it is going.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks for the invite again, Indira.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nuwan.